Everybody, a very good afternoon. Those of you who have not yet found your seat, there's plenty of space on your left and a little bit on my right, or on your right and my left. I would like to welcome you very warmly to this plenary session called Towards an Integrated Perspective on the Post-2015 Development Agenda. Having a plenary at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is indeed a little bit ambitious, but I trust on the capacity of our very engaging speakers that will sort of get us out of the after-lunch dizziness and keep us all inspired. So what's the idea of this plenary session? Stripped to its barest essentials, we, when designing the Global Soul Week, had the impression that there is generally a lack of integration. And there's a lack of integration when we look at national policies. There's a lack of integration when it comes to actually making representatives of different communities, be it policy or scientific, speak to each other. And there's, even if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, there seems to be a lack of integration within the SDGs as the overall demand that they place on our natural environment tends to be higher, at least from our point of view, than what is available. So what this session actually wants to do is to address this. And to that end, we will proceed as follows. We have two keynote speakers who will actually, I wouldn't say represent certain constituencies, but at least speak with a certain standing for the land governance community and the landscape folks. And then we have a distinguished panel who will then reflect on the individual contributions from the sessions. And as I probably won't be able to make sense out of all of this in the end, we have asked Johan from the Stockholm Environment Institute to do the wrap-up. Speaking about not being able to make sense of it afterwards, we therefore decided to provide you with a little bit of an input beforehand. And as some people say, Germans simply can't get it short, you will find the important bit towards the end of the paper. It is actually a proposal from the Institute, developed with a range of other partners on how would we propose integration could be achieved in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But there will be somebody from the session reporting on it. And with that, I actually would like to hand over to Sarah Scher. Sarah Scher is the CEO and President of Eco-Agricultures, and I would like to warmly welcome you. Join me here. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. Hi, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a real pleasure for me to be with a group of soil and land people. And I hope that one of the things my remarks may do is to further inspire you to work together to get land and soils as one of the foundations, one of the integrating foundations for the Sustainable Development Goals. As we've been talking the whole time that we've been here at the Global Soils Week, soil's important not only in its own right, but also because of its links with biodiversity and water and people and microorganisms and, of course, all the people around. So celebrating soils is an opportunity to talk more broadly about sustainable development. Get my system going here. I think most of you are familiar with the 17 proposed Sustainable Development Goals that will presumably be finalized in September. And one of the notable things is that all of them, directly or indirectly, require land and soil resources to achieve them. But in particular are the ones that are listed here, the ones to end hunger and poverty, water and sanitation, sustainable energy, resilient cities, the use of the oceans, and sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, reducing degradation, desertification, and biodiversity loss. Now, the SDGs were designed to deliver the future we want, as they said in Rio. We're not happy to achieve food and water goals without also achieving ocean and forest goals, but in fact, we can't achieve the water and food goals without also achieving the ocean goals. Unfortunately, though, the way that the SDGs have been structured has been in silos. So far, even though there's a very strong commitment to many of the members to try to have an integrated approach. But what we do see is that the demands of the individual SDGs are going to create significant competition for and pressure on the natural resource base. Let's just look at two examples of this. If we consider freshwater withdrawals, withdrawals from agriculture are projected by 2030 to increase by an additional 45%. And that's not even including the increasing demands from the energy sector, from the industrial, and from the urban sector, much less ecosystem sector. However, back in 2010, it was estimated already that 2.4 billion people, 39% of global grain production, and 22% of global GDP was at risk from water insecurity. So where are we going to get all this additional water to achieve these ambitious sustainable development goals? And there was just this important report produced by IASS on biomass that projects that the competition for biomass between food, feed, biomaterials, and bioenergy is not something that we have a plan to address. So how are we going to achieve all of these goals in the face of the natural resource constraints? And I would argue that this is really about negotiation, about stakeholders. This is not about some technical expert that's going to magically come up with a solution for what we do, but the stakeholders representing different kinds of goals, and actually, the fact that most people have a stake in the goals to some extent or another means that negotiation is going to happen. And we call this broad process integrated landscape management. At its core, it's about multi-stakeholder processes, multi-objective processes, and its approach to resource governance that is a significant shift from a highly sectorialized approach, piece by piece. The protected areas are managed by that group, the watersheds are managed by someone else, and the farming areas are managed only for food in other areas. And also it's a shift from a technocratic approach to identifying solutions to a multi-stakeholder negotiation approach. So my organization, Eco-Agriculture Partners, has been working for 10 years looking at different models of integrated landscape management. And there are 5 key elements that are common to many of these approaches. First of all, they have shared, or at least agreed, management objectives across different sectors and multiple benefits. Secondly, individual agriculture, forestry, or natural resource management practices are themselves undertaken in ways that they produce multiple benefits. Thirdly, the ecological, social, and economic interactions across the landscape are explicitly managed to reduce trade-offs and to realize synergies. Fourth, they use collaborative, community-engaged processes for resource management. And finally, markets and public policies are shaped in ways to achieve and support these strategies. So those are sort of the key pieces we've been looking at. So this is just an example from Monteverde, which is a place in Costa Rica that some decades ago established a very inclusive collaborative governance system for their area in which they generated increases in dairy production, increases in coffee production, improvement in watershed management, expanded biodiversity, and improved habitat connectivity, increased tourism, all from the same resource base that they had been engaging with. Now, this approach is not new. Many of you will be familiar with it. In fact, back in 2011, we decided to take an inventory of different communities of practice that were working on integrated landscape management and identified more than 80 at that time. We're now up to 87. And they go by their own brand names: land care, participatory watershed management, model forests, and the list goes on and on. And whereas 20 or 30 years ago, they might have looked quite different, focusing primarily on their main entry point. What's happening today is they are branching out to become multi-stakeholder processes, trying to deliver multiple benefits, and therefore they're beginning to look quite a lot alike, because the reality of these competing demands on the resource base is something that people are having to respond to, and that the existing institutions are not facilitating this process in the way that they need to. So one of the things we did was to try to, a couple of years ago, was along with partners in the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative, we wanted to get a better handle on all of these communities of practice, what was really going on out there, how much of this was really happening. And so we started to do an inventory that was completed in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, is almost completed for Europe, and hopefully will be completed by next year in North America and Australia. But we had 4 screening criteria for these initiatives. First of all, they had to explicitly seek to improve at least agriculture, sustainable agriculture, ecosystem or biodiversity conservation, and rural livelihoods. What we found is that many of these initiatives had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sectoral objectives that were included in their initiatives. Secondly, they were implementing policies or programs at a landscape scale. Third, they involved cross-sectoral coordination for policies or programs or investments. And finally, that they were participatory in terms of their collaborative management process. So this is certainly not all of the initiatives out there, but we were able to document 87 in Africa, 104 in Latin America, and 174 in Asia. And we learned a lot about who was involved in them, what was the structure for governance of these initiatives, what were their challenges, what were their achievements, and we're starting to get a handle on this, and I can direct you to the findings of that later. Let's just look at one example that many of you may be familiar with, which was in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Which basically had decades of droughts and population pressure and poor land management, which was creating a real serious issues of degradation and reliance on food aid. The results of the coordinated landscape investments that were made with more than 40 different kinds of interventions that communities could choose from over a period of time led to 400,000 hectares of degraded land being restored, doubling, tripling, and quadrupling of crop yields, and a dramatic reduction in the reliance on food aid. So what is doing this kind of work at the center of our land management mean for the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, what it means is we need to think of the means of implementation, which is the next area which is being debated by the UN and which will be addressed by each individual country as they seek to develop their strategies for the SDGs, and we need to make sure that integrated landscape management is at the core of many of those, which means that land and soils can be at the core of these. And there's 3 key things that I would just point out before I'm going to end, and that is we need to be looking at transforming the way we do business if we're going to support integrated landscape management. And we need to do that in 3 ways. The first one is we have to change the way we do our analyses and the way we do the design of our interventions. We need to have a single map that we all use for all the different resources so that we can really examine the interactions between them. We need to focus on the interface between production and ecosystem management. We need to look at interactions at local and landscape scales. And we need to generate our technical and scientific information in a way that it informs stakeholder negotiation, not just developing some excellent technical output. The second thing we need to transform is our systems of landscape governance. We need to move from governance sector by sector by sector to a more a comprehensive type of system that actively involves civil society and businesses and farmers as well as government entities. We need to, instead of having separate resource regulations for every aspect of a farm or of a region, we need to have multi-resource regulatory frameworks to consider. We need to have institutions that address both production and ecosystem management as a regular course. Now, this doesn't mean that we eliminate the need for sectoral specialists or for sectoral institutions or even subsectoral ones. It means that all of those specialists need to be trained and have the capacities and the tools to operate within multifunctional systems. That's the core. And finally, we need to transform markets and finance. We need to get businesses engaged. And one of the things I did notice, Global Soil Week, what an amazing group of people have gotten together. But not too much representation from the private sector or private sector associations. And I think these groups need to become much more active players in this. We need to be mobilizing public and civic funds to pay for the enabling investments that are required to allow integrated landscape management to work, the institutional platforms, the agreed regulations, capacity building, et cetera. And then we need to define and enforce basic guidelines on land and water investment to ensure that they agree with, or that they at least align with the agreed landscape objectives. And finally, we need to develop innovative financial mechanisms. And there's been an explosion of new innovation in this area. And this year, we're going to see a lot of that showcased at the Global Landscape Forum. Finally, we are part of a major coalition of organizations worldwide that are promoting this approach. We helped to found it in 2012, called Landscapes for People, Food, and Nature, and it offers a lot of opportunities on the ground with learning landscape networks, the sharing and development of tools for integrated landscape management, and policy dialogue at the national and international level. I hope that many of you might want to join with us in this, and I hope that the really sophisticated deliberations that I'm observing here at Global Soil Week are going to generate very bold recommendations for action that will put soils and lands at the foundation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I'll leave it there, thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Just on all this multi-stakeholder stuff, we use the terminology also quite a bit. What's your elevator talk on making this possible? So convince me that this is actually doable.
There is both a science and art to multi-stakeholder collaboration, and I think we actually know a great deal about how to establish the conditions for who needs to be involved in them, how to engage with them before they can start engaging with one another, establishing facilitation processes to make sure that they're speaking the same language. We are involved with the development of, and many of our partners are, of a whole range of tools that help in landscape assessment to come to an agreed landscape assessment that can help to negotiate around design interventions. There's various kinds of qualitative and quantitative modeling tools. So I think we are not where we were 20 years ago. There is a science, and it's also an art as well, and a lot of political leadership that's required. My number one priority, I say, for this is leadership development. Across sectors, working with all the folks in a landscape to learn these tools together, learn this language together. So it's not easy. It's just no one wakes up in the morning and says, why don't we do a landscape approach? Yeah. It's tough. You do it when the other approaches aren't working.
Okay. So difficult question, but super short answer. I know that many of you in this room are concerned with power imbalances sort of in addressing natural resource management within a multi-stakeholder approach. Yeah. How do you guarantee that sort of not the big guys dominate the small?
Okay, well, you never guarantee anything, but there's many tools, many structural approaches for how you set up multi-stakeholder processes, the way that you establish decision processes so that you provide ample time for more disadvantaged groups to do their own discussions before they come to the group. Having alliances, it's a political question and the question of political commitments, but we do know a lot about things in the process that can make it much more effective.
Inshallah. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Our next speaker is Klaus Daninger. Klaus Daninger is lead economist at the Development Economics Group at the World Bank. Many of you probably know him from the World Bank Annual Land Conference and the related scientific work. Klaus, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. And I wanted to build on what Sarah has said by making the point that the link, not only that the link is essential, but also pointing to some of the opportunities that are there, and then asking for all of you, essentially due to new technologies and advances that we have been making, and then asking for all of your collaboration in terms of actually taking that forward. I think we all know that conceptually any investment requires secure land rights, and sustainability of such investments, especially in areas where land rights are communal, have been quite a challenge, and I think Sarah has been showing some pictures here of Ethiopia. And clearly, historically, millions of people have been excluded, especially in communal areas, from having such rights. We are also increasingly, and I think we discussed a lot of these things at the land conference, doing interventions to give people more secure rights But of course, having clear indicators of how this, or clear data to actually know what is the impact of this is absolutely critical to avoid the risks. And I think, just let me give you an example. In Rwanda, for example, we helped the government to implement a massive campaign for securing the rights after a process where the government had realized that it was absolutely critical to prevent future conflict and to increase investment in the country's very scarce agricultural land base to establish gender equality. They did a gender equality law first. But then what we found, we did an evaluation of that, we found that yes, investment was doubled. It was even tripled for women who were, for female-headed households, because they had much less secure rights before. But there was a snag, because women who were not legally married actually lost out as a result of that, because as was written in the law, the government didn't give them, or the officials on the ground didn't give them any recorded rights. So the government changed that, and that actually provided the basis for taking things forward. Also, I think information is absolutely critical to get the private sector to do its part in terms of both contract monitoring for transfers that the government has initiated, which has been minimal, but also an increased emphasis by the private sector, and I will tell you a little bit more about that, in terms of zero degradation, zero land grab policies. But of course, these need to be monitored, and you need to give the information to civil society, to other stakeholders, to actually hold, and to government, to hold these actors to account, because without doing that, it is absolutely, these commitments are pretty much meaningless. But of course, in that context, new options provide very exciting opportunities, because as has been discussed here, new technology makes it much easier to acquire information on land use. But of course, the trick is that if you have only information on land use, that may be quite nice pictures to look at. But if you can actually link that to land rights, then you can really derive policy conclusions that are very meaningful for government and that can be translated directly into policy recommendations. In that context, I think it's very exciting that we are now getting cadastral data, however incomplete, for entire countries. And of course, that allows us to answer questions like as whether at the landscape level, securing rights and the type of rights that people have actually makes any difference. It also allows us to ask whether smallholders are living up to their productive potential, and whether introduction of value chains and establishment of new enterprises actually makes any difference in terms of the benefits for smallholders, which eventually count. And of course, whether is land that is transferred to large farms is actually efficiently utilized. And that is one of the examples that is actually efficiently utilized. Let me give 3 examples of innovations that have been presented and discussed in great detail at the Land Conference. First is the documentation of community rights through volunteer geospatial information, where essentially with the technology that people have cell phones that have GPS devices, you can actually, in India, a couple of states in India have done that on a very large scale to implement the Forest Rights Act, so that people can actually map the community rights that they have. And of course, that provides very exciting opportunity. And they used satellite imagery to establish cutoff points of occupation. And then, of course, that provides very interesting opportunities for impact assessment at landscape level. Second one is addressing the impact of land-based investments. We now have data together with from a number of countries, Ethiopia being the first one of them, where the government has done a complete survey of all the large farms that have been transferred, all of the farms above 50 hectares, a sample of the farms between 10 and 50 hectares. And of course, that allows us to assess whether that land is efficiently utilized. We find 55% of land is not utilized at all. The highest yields are in the category between 10 and 20 hectares. And we can actually link that to household surveys to see whether there are positive or negative spillovers on neighboring smallholders, which again, I think is quite interesting. And the third one, which I think I skipped for time reasons, is whether the private sector actually lives up to its commitments in terms of zero deforestation. information, which again is something you need data, you need monitoring, and you need to have multi-stakeholder platforms that actually regularly review this data and draw conclusions on that. To effectively use that, I think that it's very important that we link administrative data, spatial information, household survey-based data, and I think household survey-based can be census data, can be enterprise censuses that we're increasingly using, but they need to be geo-referenced so that you can actually make sense of it, and that can provide the basis for not only for research, but accountability and private decision-making in many areas, from weather-based index insurance to actually which also reduces the risks and makes it more easy for smallholders to invest. So clearly, we have unique opportunities with new technology, but of course, in order to actually apply this at the ground level, we need to get them into country dialogues. And that is where I think from the land tenure side, the voluntary guidelines provide us an excellent opportunity to establish multi-stakeholder platforms and to integrate between high-level issues that are, for example, being emphasized in the World Bank's Doing Business, which policymakers care a lot about, and which is actually something which we are now revising to make a little bit more sense than it did previously by focusing on the extent of land area that is mapped, which means that communal areas actually count, and governments can make a lot of progress in improving on doing business by mapping their communal areas, and the number of registered transactions as well as gender, which I think is also absolutely critical and which is an area where administrative data can give you a lot of power and a lot of action that is absolutely critical to hold governments to account. But then, of course, we need to have multi-stakeholder panels to interpret the outcomes and feed into policies, and I think there we have a lot of very innovative and interesting pilots that are going on. I think the most promising is probably Vietnam, where the government is now interested not only to have a national land governance index, but actually to translate that down at the district and even commune level and have multi-stakeholder platforms at these different levels of administration, feeding the data to them, and then using the feedback that they're getting from the stakeholders in terms of to actually translate this into policy recommendations. Of course, in order to do that and to scale that up, we have established a system or a couple of indicators, 6 of them, for national land governance monitoring, which are the total area mapped, the number of records in women's name, the number of registered transactions, the coverage with tax maps and the taxes collected, expropriation, and pending and resolved disputes. We see enormous potential for collaboration here because, as the World Bank, we are getting increased. Governments are realizing that without secure tenure, it will be very difficult for them to both, and without transparent access to data and interoperable systems that make this data available, it will be very difficult for them to either attract private investment, because responsible investors will not go into a country where they will feature in the press the next day for exploiting local people. They will also need to do that to provide this information for farmers to be secure of their tenure, to either move out into non-agricultural businesses or to invest in their agricultural businesses, and they will need that for urban expansion. Because if you want to avoid sprawl and provide proper urban and land utilization planning, you need to have data available, and you need to have an inclusive process of multiple stakeholders to actually make sense of this. We think that this new demand offers immense scope for advancing on this agenda and having very beneficial effects, but of course it also carries with it enormous risks, because in land tenure you cannot make any mistakes, because mistakes will be fatal. And I just wanted to remind you of the way in which communal lands were privatized in Central America at the end of the 18th century, which led to 50 years of conflict and land reform efforts and violence. And so I think we need to be very careful. We need to be aware of the risks. We need to be constantly monitoring how we are doing. And of course, we need all of your support and help in doing so to avoid us to make mistakes and make sure that the potential to improve the livelihoods of small farmers and landholders in rural areas is actually realized rather than lost.
Thank you, Klaus. Don't run away. I also have the how question for you. Because the what is always nice and linking levels and all that. I was particularly intrigued by your example of the Indian case where people actually mapped their communal lands with cell phones or other small GPS devices. What did you actually do so that government actually treated the data as sort of credible and actually use it in their policy?
Actually, I think it was the government itself who introduced that. And I think it was, I think the World Bank is much less powerful than most people think. What I think is very clear to governments is that if they want to go to scale and document rights, they need to have a mechanism by which local evidence can mature into formal rights. And that is something where I think we are seeing not only increasing opportunities with the fact that, that technology is getting into people's hands, but also governments increasingly making use of these opportunities. And I always think one good example is better than 30 cases of failure. So popularizing these good examples and showing it around can actually help governments to take similar steps.
Okay, thanks, Klaus. Okay, I would now like to introduce those of you who have been at the first plenary session. You have witnessed or seen a nice movie prepared from our colleagues from BRAC in Bangla. As I suppose many of us are not completely fluent in Bangla, we have now guaranteed that the subtitles actually show. And I would ask our colleagues in the back to actually screen the movie and then to remove the desk. And thanks, of course, to our colleagues from BRAC who have prepared the video. I don't know where Sira is, but thanks to him.
ছিল না খাওয়ার মতো এমন কোনো উপযোগী নেই কিন্তু ভাই আমরা যখন বন্যা দেখি তখন আমাদের ভয়ঙ্কর লাগে তখন লাগে যেন আমরা উদ্ধার সপরিবার আমরা মরে যাব এই অবস্থা আমাদের কিন্তু এই বছর বছর আসে হয়তো 2-3 মাস পর পরে আবার ঘূর্ণিঝড় শুরু হয়ে যায় ঘরে থাকতে অনেক কষ্ট হয় আমাদের মানে বাচ্চা নিয়ে অনেক কষ্ট নাই একটা সাইকেলিং সেন্টার নাই রোড নাই ঘাট নাই কোথাও যাওয়ার আমাদের এই সময় জায়গা থাকে না মানে এরকম মাথা উঁচুই আসে জোয়ার দেখলে আমাদের অনেক ভয়ঙ্কর লাগে
এরপরে ভাবলাম যে আমাদের একটা সংগঠন তৈরি করা দরকার উপর থেকে অনেক লোকজন এসে এখানে অনেক চাপ সৃষ্টি করে অনেকে বলে যে এটা কোম্পানিগঞ্জের এরিয়া এখানে এটা কোম্পানিগঞ্জের জায়গা আমরা এখানে সরপল্লবী এটা এখানে আমরা নথি করছি আমাদের নথির জমি আপনারা এটা ছেড়ে দিতে হবে কিছু ভূমিদস্যুরা আমাকে টার্গেট করলো যে একে যদি নিধন করে দেওয়া যায় একে যদি স্তব্ধ করে দেওয়া যায় অফ করে দেওয়া যায় তাহলে আমরা জমিটা দখল করতে আমাদের সুবিধা হবে এত কিছুর পরেও আমি এতটুকু নিশ্চয়তার মধ্যে নাই যে আমি এত কষ্ট করে এত পরিশ্রম করে যে ধুধু বালুর চরটাকে আজকে আবাদি জমিতে রূপান্তরিত করলাম এই জমিটা আদৌ আমার হবে কিনা
You see how difficult it is for an Institute for Advanced Studies to actually have subtitles and sound in one movie. But, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I would like to begin with Austin Tibu. Austin is Deputy Director of the Land Resources Conservation Department in the Ministry of Agriculture, Malawi. Austin, a very warm welcome to you. Have a seat. Welcome. As of now, well known to you, Mujahed Achuri, the Director of the Land and Water Division of FAO. Mujahed, a warm welcome. We have the president of the International Union of Soil Sciences, Rainer Horn, with us. Rainer, welcome. And we are grateful to have Philip with us, who actually made his time available on a very short notice to replace Sofia Monsalvia. Philip, thank you very much for your efforts. Philip is from the Food First Information Action Network. Thank you very much. Okay, we will invert the order a little, and I have a little sheet, I should have, where actually we have asked the rapporteurs of the respective dialogue sessions to please prepare mini inputs, and I'm going to be very picky when it comes to timing here, actually giving us the core messages of their respective sessions. And then we will ask the panel to please be so kind to reflect on these. So we invert the order. We have your contributions first, and then the guys up here responding. The first one who I would like to invite is Mariam. Mariam Rahmanian von Senesta, reporting on session 1.1, Food Security and Sustainable Food Systems. You're either welcome to come up here or speak wherever you want to be. Here's a nice light, and there's a microphone over there, or you use mine. No, I don't have one.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I just stand here. How much time do I have? Yes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So I have the pleasure to report back from the session yesterday on food security, soils and food security. This is the first time that the Global Soil Week has, oh my goodness. I'm not going to sing, but it's the first time. Thank you. It's the first time that the Global Soil Week has actually explicitly discussed food security and soils. And it was a very well-attended session, and I think this really underlines the fact that it's actually really important to make explicit the links between food security and soils. I think that it's often, in the past, it's often been implicit, and we all think, well, of course, soils are important because we grow food from soils, and therefore there is a link. Of course, there's a link. But it's important to make this link explicit, because I think when it's implicit, the assumption is that the link is about production. That if you have degraded soils, you can't produce food. If you have healthy soils, you produce more food, and that's basically, it's a production thing. But what was very nice in our session yesterday was that we actually expanded out beyond the question of production. So what was sort of universally agreed, I think, amongst all the participants is that it's not only a question of production, although that's important as well, but food security, of course, is a question of access, of equity, of distribution, and also, of course, as we all know more recently, the question of food waste is also on the agenda. So soil is related to all of these. And also in terms of the question of access and equity and distribution, some people in the group suggested that food sovereignty might actually be in some ways a more useful frame than just food security, because food sovereignty tends to focus in on the questions of equity, of access and power, and who is actually controlling the food system. So we split up into two groups, parallel, to discuss two different aspects of food security. One was agroecology, and one was climate change. And I'm going to just present the results all together because I only have a couple of minutes. So agroecology, we underlined that agroecology is not just about ecological food production. It's not just a technical issue of how we treat soils, but it's also a question of actually transforming the entire food system, that we can't look at soils in isolation, as many other people have said this morning. We had a very vivid example of many African countries who in the past decades were self-sufficient in food, were exporting food, and now are net importers of food, basically because policies were promoted to export monocultures. And how can you actually get back to managing the soil well if your economic system is based on exporting monocultures? So the question of markets, for example, came. You can't change the way that you manage your soils if you don't have appropriate markets that are biodiversity friendly, for example. Also we underline the fact that food security is not just a question of soil management, it's also a question of access to land, which we heard earlier today. So it's really impossible and not advisable to separate these issues. In terms of climate change, we discussed questions of governance structures, what governance structures are needed at different levels to confront climate change. And at all levels, we underlined that it was important to have these multi-stakeholder processes that we just discussed. And also, in the agroecological debate, we underlined the importance of strengthening the organizations of farmers, but also pastoralists, indigenous peoples, and so on. Because without strong organizations that represent people, you can't have this strong multi-stakeholder process. Also, in the climate change debate, people underlined the importance of being adaptive and flexible. So there's never a one-size-fits-all policy, but it's important to have a diversity of different approaches, whether in research, in public policy, and also in civic action, and to constantly experiment with
you.
Yes, to experiment with, see what works, and always have a different basket of things. We talked a lot about research, and I'm sorry that research in agroecology was really underlined a lot, the importance of having dialogue. Farmers, pastoralists, etc., and researchers, they each have their own knowledge. They each have a role, different roles in research, and it's important to have a dialogue, not a top-down or sort of the scientist telling the farmer what to do. The importance of transparency in research, the importance of building trust, long-term relationships, and also the importance of passion was underlined. And I say this because I appreciated that Klaus Topfer yesterday talked about the importance of emotions and that you can't separate all of what we're talking about from the emotional aspects of our relation with each other, with society, and with nature. So we had a call for scientists who are passionate to work with farmers.
I'm about to get emotional. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The next one whom I would like to introduce is Hans Herren, who will report back from the session Competing Visions for a Sustainable Future, basically addressing, well, the SDGs. Hans, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And you know, there is a little screen here, and it has a purpose.
Like is it like the seconds?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see now. Thank you for. So yeah, our report on the group, we were supposed to look at the implication of different forms of biomass production for land competition. And in the framework, basically, there was a document which has just been published on the biomass issues in the SDGs and the governance implication. So if you look at that report, basically it looks like on the SDG as drafted right now will demand a substantial increase of resources to satisfy the demand in biomass. And biomass is actually, it's food, it's feed, fiber, and probably the most controversial part of it is the biofuels. Now, I think we sort of, in the discussion, we discussed that that may not be a given. Whatever is in there in terms of sort of estimates and the targets, most probably will vary from country to country. And clearly, we all know that those targets will have to be defined at national level. So there's still room, I think, for improvement in terms of, what kind of resources will be needed to satisfy those biomass needs, looking at the whole amount of the biomass. But clearly, I think when these targets are being set, I think we have to take into account, or whoever does it will have to take into account the natural resource base in those different countries or region, and also at global level. So there's going to be a lot of working together to make sure that in the end, we don't overshoot those famous boundaries. We need also to probably reevaluate sort of the actual needs versus the wishes, because there are a lot of wishes, I think, in there. And what are the actual needs? And maybe we have to tune down some of those needs and also look at alternatives. I think one discussion we had is, okay, what are the alternatives to what biomass we have now? Starting actually from the food demand, we already grow twice as much as we need, so maybe we have to start there. Looking at alternative production systems, which are more efficient with natural resource use. And on the biomass for biofuel in particular, I think we have to really look at more at the national needs, capacities, and take all this into account, when finalizing those targets. Oh, I'm already in the red here. Okay, so basically, if you summarizing all this, we thought we have to first make sure there's a multi-stakeholder approach to the definition of this. Again, multi-stakeholder is everywhere it comes. I think this is probably one of the biggest things in the SDGs. We have to include basically all the stakeholder in the system. Never mind that a lot of countries don't like the term multi-stakeholder, as we just heard a couple of weeks ago in New York. So we're going to have to think about this harder. The issues which will need special attention in the coming discussion, again, the whole demand for biomass versus biofuel, so basically food and other needs. And food, feed, and shelter and clothing, that should be the most important one, I guess, and biofuels whenever there are options. But even there, research will help us actually look at more alternatives. Should there be demand caps? Again, wishes versus what is actually possible. The whole function of the markets in a resource-limited world. Can we just let these free markets run the place, or do we have to put some system in place who will actually take into account the limitations we have? And what are, again, alternative options to expected development in terms of biomass production and needs? Again, I think there is a lot of new development, research coming, and I think these all have to be part of the decision process, governance process of the biomass production and utilization in the future. 1 minute more. Okay.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you.
Next on my list, I have been indicated that one of the topics that we continue to sort of push in the Global Soil Week is the question of cities and urban and overcoming even this terminological divide. And I have somebody who is going to speak on this session, if I'm rightly informed. It's Peter de Vries, who is going to report back on this. Peter, warm welcome. Welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. We had yesterday a very exciting discussion about a topic that is complementary to these issues about soils and sustainability. The reason for holding it is that there is this conference on habitat in Quito next year, and already a pre-conference is being held in Kenya at the moment. So it was the title of the conference was about overriding the urban-rural divide. Habitat will be about the linkages between the rural and the urban. So the question is, why do we go on talking about these linkages? It looks like it is a very old-fashioned discourse, language about migration, about modernization. Is it possible to think in a different way about the urban? Can we think about large global processes of urbanization, forms of investment that have enormous impacts at the global level? Or is the urban just something, an empirical topic that can be studied through the usual methodologies urbanists use, such as GIS? There were three presentations. One, the introduction, was about thinking the urban. The urban is not only about creation of cities, the provision of services. It is also about expulsions. So the whole issue, the political economy of the urban, was put on the agenda very early. Then there were three presentations. One presentation was about a regional development plan in Colombia, the creation of a metropolitan planning system, very innovative, that takes into account issues of social justice in a city that many would consider is not possible to plan. This was the presentation was by a policymaker, which led to another presentation which was more theoretical, was about the thinking of the urban itself, in which the presenter came to the conclusion that, taking the example of Chennai, people do fight for this right of the city. That was about resettlement projects, and people were evicted outside, well, to peripheral areas, and to go on fighting fighting for the right to live within the city. Then there was another presentation also on Jakarta, which was a very interesting, fascinating celebration about creativity in the city, about the creation of markets, and this led to a very interesting discussion about how planning actually stands behind or is not able to capture all these initiatives and practices of people in the city. We had in the end, we had a discussion about the use of methodologies such as GIS for processes of urbanization, how to link it with deeper debates about social justice and the city. There was also much talk about issues of power, about the relationship between the political economy of urbanization, of city making, the world city, and the lived experiences of the city. And there was also an interesting discussion about the whole discourse, this idea of the global city as an attractive place where constructors can invest.
Peter, thank you very much. And this is really an unfortunate role that I have now, sort of being a manifestation of a blinking clock is not necessarily very inspiring. Next, you've probably seen from the program, and has been introduced by Yvonne on the first day, what we are trying to do is actually to link the question of soils and land to the various SDGs. And of course, one debate that is only partly covered by the SDG debate of the Post-2015 Development Agenda, which is of course very prominent in the year 2015, is the climate agenda. And I'm very grateful that we had a session together with UNFCCC actually addressing the question of sustainable land management and climate change adaptation and mitigation. And if I'm rightly informed, we have Henry Sibanda from UNDP Malawi with us, who accepted, and I'm grateful for that, the role of the rapporteur of the session. Henry, warm welcome to you. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'll just report on the group that looked at the mitigation and adaptation of climate change through sustainable land management. We had about 5 key presentations. The first 2 looked at the scientific, aspects, looking at the carbon sequestration and so on, especially in the soils. Then we had a presentation from the UNCCD, which looked at the role of UNCCD, the financing. And what came out of that was, what we need to stress is that the land is finite, and the cost of restoration, there was an estimate that was given for the cost of restoration and so on. Then we moved on to look at the role of adaptation and mitigation. Looking at that can be done through 2 ways, either reduction of emissions or enhancement of carbon sinks. That could be done through the REDD+. It could also be done, that can be done with government interventions. It should also include the social inclusion, that we are not dealing with the land and leaving the people behind. That's important to stress. Then we came down to the country level, where we looked at a presentation from Burundi and Malawi and Zimbabwe. The Burundi presentation looking specifically at developing a methodology for identifying land degradation and vulnerability assessment, which can be used to guide policymakers and decision makers on what to do with land degradation. The Malawi presentation looked at a governance pathway. The first one looked at the governance pathway to sustainable land management. Then we looked at the Agora project, which was looking at how you mobilize the communities for sustainable land management. And the Zimbabwe case was looking at a case study, a successful case study of livelihoods using bamboo and bananas that can be planted to rehabilitate gullies and also earn income for the communities, as well as using bamboo to make baskets and chairs and so on. But what is important from this was whenever you're doing the sustainable land management, we're actually looking at interventions that are feasible as well as acceptable to the communities. I think that's what comes out strongly. But what was not very conclusive was, where do we draw the line? Where does mitigation measures end and where does the adaptation measures start? So there is a thin line, or there is a phase in, phase out. So that sometimes we find donors are looking at specific, we want programs on mitigation or adaptation. But on the ground, there is a thin line. It's not very easy to differentiate. So I think those were the important outcomes of our group. Thank you.
Henry, thank you very much. As those of you who know the ISS a little know, we don't only love cities, we also love fish. And we have had a big session for the first time on linking the oceans debate to the soil debate. And we have Paul Nathaniel, who's going to report on this. Paul, very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I will try to give you 3 English minutes because I'm all that stands between you and coffee. Soil. So the soil, sediment, sea nexus. From ridge to reef, from mountain top to ocean trench. Truly transdisciplinary in a scientific sense, and the need to hook up the science from mountain through river, delta, and the sea. But it's also cross-cutting, because it has implications to do with politics, social aspects, the economics, and the legal. And the legal landscape changes when you put your feet into the water. But also there are cultural issues associated with that littoral zone. So we have a very complex system, but it's a very important one because more than half the people on the planet live in that urban littoral zone. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you may be tempted to give up because it's too complicated. But Rome was begun on a day. So I'd like you to think about the Nike logo of Just Do It. Engaging stakeholders is essential if you're going to move from an I win, you lose to a we win. And having a shared vision is part of that process. Apart from that physical nexus, there is also a nexus of laws and policies. The way we look after our land, who owns it, who controls it, needs to be integrated with how we do the same for our seas. So we need an integrated form of governance. We need to implement what we already have in the way of legislation. We need to motivate where we can and who we can, and only legislate for what we must legislate. Education, information, and awareness raising is a prerequisite to empowerment. We need a revolution in the way we go about our economy that is beyond mere transformation. We need to move from a production economy to a protection economy, from a consumption economy to a conservation economy, and we need to change our thinking from silos to systems so that our decisions are not simple, but are as sophisticated as the challenges we're trying to address. So in order to change behavior, I have a suggestion for those of you who manage the beach resorts that we will visit on our summer holidays. Use the tourists to your country from the cold north coming to the warm south, in Europe anyway, and look at those as opportunities to educate us when we have the spare time and the interest in that boundary between land and sea. Think about making our industries more eco-friendly and doing it quickly. And finally, don't be paralyzed, and this was a philosopher's comment, by cognitive dissonance. Think about repairing, not replacing, and recognize that that internal tension between what we know and what we do is natural, but we can overcome it. Thank you. And it's just 4 minutes.
Thank you. Learning in beach resorts for somebody who's sort of slightly involved in the Global Soul Week sounds like a very promising alternative. I would like to, so we have a wealth of inputs, but I would like to take 3 brief comments from the audience for our panelists to reflect upon, who of course will then do justice to the debates that they have witnessed so far. So 3 brief comments from the audience, questions that you would like to have the panelists reflect upon. So we have first one over there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Evangelos Koumendakos, and I work for COPA and COGECA, the European Farmers and Agri Cooperatives. I think that what could unite all of the sessions is that we need to see food production and environmental protection not as competitive, but in a complementary way. That is a key issue in order to see synergies and to work around solutions that will pull that rather than push farmers, and to have an ownership of the targets that we all need to come up to. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. I trust that there are 2 more, one in the back.
My name is Maximilian Bock, Minister of Agriculture and Environment in Austria. I want to stress one thing. We had a kind of sustainable development strategy for Austria 10 or 12 years ago. And there was one goal, to get, we have 25 hectares per day using for construction and things like this, and we want to go down to 2.5 hectares per year, but per day. So we have all these goals, and we do not achieve one of these.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Coming back to the how. Is there a third one to kickstart the debate, or shall I hand over to our panelists? Okay, well then. So, I'd actually like to start with Philip, if you permit. And we have asked our panelists to please reflect on what they've heard from their respective point of view. In addition, from what I heard, I have an additional question that I would like to pose to you. From Fiat's point of view, from the work that you are doing and these considerations on multi-stakeholder platforms that also the ISS is using quite a bit, what's your take on these? Sort of, why do you see this working? What are the challenges you might be perceiving? If you could also reflect on this question when you make your comments. Thank you, Philip.
Okay. Good afternoon. I think the last point was quite interesting. I think I still have to digest it. I will come back to it later. My first comment, or from taking from all these inputs, these interesting inputs, and also your question, would be And given the fact that we are talking about this under the framing of the post-2015 development goals, is also to step one way back before we talk about the objectives and we talk about the indicators perhaps even and how we implement them. Basically to say that these are, we're moving in a system in the UN, the post-2015 development framework is a UN framework, and actually in this framework we already have a framework. We have kind of an overarching framework, and this framework are human rights. So this is not just to say, so I think that we have to be very aware that everything that we discuss it in this context of human rights and of this existing human rights framework, even, and perhaps especially, particularly when you talk about more technical issues, so as to keep in mind. So what does that mean? That's not just to say that has real implications when we talk about the how. It has, I mean, the human rights approach basically has several implications. One being that it defines clearly who is a rights holder and who is a duty bearer. So who has rights and who has obligations, and these obligations, these duty bearers are in the first place states. And rights holders are people, but human rights are also about putting the most marginalized sectors of society in the center of the attention. The reason why I'm saying this is because I think this has quite some implications when it comes, for example, to looking at the implementation of these goals and so on, that we have to, that's where we have to look at these people, at these vulnerable, at these marginalized groups and their human rights. But it also has implications on processes and how we want to proceed with implementation and how we are moving forward. And one of this is, for example, when we talk about what has been raised here several times, is competing demands that have to be balanced, multi-stakeholder approaches, and so on. The human rights framework is also very clear on that, in the sense that when we talk about multi-stakeholder approaches, we have to be very clear that the stakes are not the same for, say, a fisher, a small-scale fisher, a pastoralist, a farmer, as the stake is for a company that wants to acquire land rights. This is just put as simple as that. That has consequences. When we talk about balancing, about how to balance competing needs, I think this is something that we have to look, to keep into account, to be very clear about. And obviously there are other actors. There are private sector, there are business companies and so on, but let's be clear that in the first place it's about states. States have the legitimacy and states have the obligations to ensure human rights, and that's the context in which we are talking about. And then more broadly, as I said, this management, this has consequences. This human rights approach thus has consequences also for management and governance of natural resources. So as states it's first and foremost states who have the obligation to ensure that resources are used within the limits, but ensuring the human rights of small-scale food producers as those who are the most marginalized people. And talking about that governance and talking about also this global level and thinking a bit also how we are advancing with these goals. I think there are, when we talk about human rights, we also have to take into account that there are institutions and there are governance mechanisms already established, human rights institutions and so on. And specifically when it comes to issues around food, about nutrition, we have the Committee on World Food Security, which is based in Rome, and which is the most inclusive platform on taking decisions on food issues around food and nutrition, and specifically also the 10-year guidelines that have been mentioned here, come from there, and they are very fundamentally based on human rights principles, and are therefore also anchored in the human rights system. And perhaps I leave the rest for my second intervention.
Thank you, Philip. I would sort of, coming to the next question, I think Henry made it very clear sort of the competing donor requests that emerged when it comes to sort of sustainable land management. And I was wondering, Austin, as you're representing the respective government body, whether in your response you would also like to take up that point, sort of how do you handle all these competing donor requests? And so if you could reflect on this also in your statement.
Thank you very much, moderator. Yes, I would reflect on the donor requirement in many projects, not only in Malawi, where I come from, but also across the developing world. First of all, I'll look at the temporal space that are demanded by most development partners. I think all of you agree that in many projects in sustainable land management, where I come from, the minimum economic period is around 3 years. But as a government in Malawi, we are trying to encourage donors to go beyond the 3 years so that we realize the benefits at community level. So at the moment, we have projects that are going close to 10 years on sustainable land management. One of it is targeting the important basin for agriculture and energy production in the Shira River Basin. That is one of the critical basins that supplies almost 100% of the energy requirement in Malawi. That brings me to, maybe if you'd allow me, moderator, to the issue of the nexus between soils, sediments, and oceans. I think we had a lot of poetic presentation from my colleague, but I like the way he presented it, that we need to move away from silos to systems. I think where I come from in Malawi, soils are related to agriculture, probably because agriculture is the key economic activity, but my personal view is that we need to move beyond regarding soils as only related to agriculture, because we have witnessed flooding as relation to soil degradation. We have witnessed a lot of industrial degradation due to loss of energy because of the soil issue. And we have also witnessed the loss of water quality because of the soil issue. So we need to move out of agriculture in soil conservation. Finally, Chair, Moderator, if you would accept me to comment on the issues of cities and soils, I would like to us to reflect on the issues on how can we look at rural agricultural producers as partners to urban consumers, because that's one of the critical landscape approach that would follow in terms of marketing, in terms of nutrient supply, and in terms of equity, and in terms of economics. Thank you, Chair.
And of course, Mujahed, the donor integration question somehow touches upon your background.
Thank you, yes, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm glad to hear today that was this explicit soils and food security. Being from FAO, our mandate, of course, is agriculture and food security. And what the comment made by the colleague talking about food production and environment protection. We've been in Berlin in January this year, and there were 72 ministers during the Green Week. And there was a lot of discussion about sustainable food and agriculture. And to some extent, there was a statement that I maybe cannot forget was, yes, food production, but not at any price. But not at any price. And I guess this is where we have to look a little bit to the full picture, how to see it comprehensive. And then, why I like today, I mean, this, by the way, I mean, these 2 days, they were very rich. I don't know what not to forget. There are so many good ideas to take. What I liked with this direct link between soils and food security, first of all, I guess through this, I guess we can attract other people like policymakers that maybe before it was not scaling to some extent. When we talk soil conservation, maybe it doesn't mean much to them. But when we say people, they are not going to get what to eat if we don't take into account this, I guess maybe they can think a little bit twice, and maybe they can also invest and put the required resource for this. The second issue, which I found very important, I have been through it for many countries, when we talk a little bit about this multi-stakeholder dialogue, it's easy to say, it's very difficult to implement. I've been in countries where sometimes this, food security, there are ministries, they do believe that food security is Ministry of Agriculture, which is not correct, and it was very, very difficult to bring these stakeholders together and to discuss food security. And this is maybe brings me to an important issue, which is what are maybe the appropriate or let's say institutional arrangements. And these are very important. If you would like really to talk a little bit about soils and food security, or a little bit soils, I mean, we have really to think about what are the institutions that are required to implement such policies. And the other last comment that I would like maybe to put maybe is a question. We've been, I guess through approach, we heard very nice approaches, and we heard a lot about gaps and challenges. Always the question, we are not starting today, and I like it what has been said, better to repair, not to replace. There are so many already approaches which are working well, and we have really to think about starting from there, especially now that we are talking about SDGs and the role soils that they are going to play on this. So we have to be careful a little bit and to start from where we are instead of maybe starting again and going from scratch. Thank you.
Last but not least, Rainer, it's your turn. And we heard several requests, very vivid from Mariam, but also from the Cities Group, on the way people are envisioning research to get involved in these transformation processes. So how does IUSS respond to these demands?
Well, first of all, many thanks, yes, that I'm allowed to come here and to talk a bit about what IUSS means. For those who do not know what IUSS means, that means we have more than 60,000 soil scientists all over the world. So which means there's a lot of knowledge available worldwide. And so we are for sure able to also face various questions and to answer them as well with knowledge. So also those concerning the city questions or the discussion about the sea problem, sea soil and these effects. Well, let's start a bit before, and I would also like to get included the information which Macho had just mentioned concerning the. Well, we should not start again from the beginning. We have just simply to accept first, and then I come also back to your question. We have to accept first that soils are not renewable. We know that. This also means that the history of those soils is our future, which means we cannot get rid of what had been done in the past with our soils. So this cannot be repaired in total. So we have to live with that. This also means we then have also to consider what are the properties of these sites, because we all know that these soils are not equally available, and they have not all the same properties, but there are curiosities and there are differences in possibilities to get food production done or to filter and buffer the surface water for clean groundwater, for example, in cities as well. So we have limits for these sites. This then also means we need to know where are these limits, what are these limits, and from there on we can start. So these limits mean also that we can use various areas, and the integrated landscape management means I would like to turn it exactly around. The soils are not to be doubled, or you cannot enlarge the amount of soils. So all what you like to do with management has to be adjusted to the soil properties and not the other way around. This then also means we have to consider also the financial system concerning the support of farmers, of foresters, or landscape planners, of also the city planners. They all have to face with the problems of a soil, of the soils, and soils are very different. And so for that reason, we also have to, again, define these limits. What can we do where? And how far can we then also support even small farmers? What was told with Marian, in the report of Marian, was for small farmers, if they go to a more sustainable land use management system, which then means it takes a long while until we get, let's say, a more dynamic equilibrium in a more sustainable way. So we can have an intensified sustainability discussion started, but this costs time and money. So this means we need for sure the interaction between properties, chemical, physical, biological properties of sites. This is our limit, and we have to start from there, from the existing property, and can go then from there also to the next step. Come on, what is more sustainable? What is better for the future in order to not repair, which is even more expensive. Replacing we can't do because then we have to get rid of the globe and have to start from the beginning. This is not possible. For that reason, I would think education, awareness. This is what was told here in the report about fish, soil, sediments, sea nexus. Education as well as awareness means please start from the early beginning. That's the kindergarten. Go to the kindergarten, train these kids. This is our future and nothing else than this. So we have to go there. We have to also include then for sure also the public. We have to, and this is even the harder problem, to try to convince politicians that they first pose a question. And even if it's so simple, they have to pose it, or we have to try to answer even first easy questions in order to get them then, let's say, interested in the discussion about what is our soil, what is soil management. Going back to your you
see me only wobbling around.
Okay, so I stop first and you continue first. I come on late again.
Thanks, Rainer. We still owe a response to our colleague from Copa Cogeca, which I haven't forgotten. But as I know that there have been people explicitly addressing the European level, I would actually encourage Jörg Frauenstein from the Federal Environment Agency to make his brief comment and to please be so kind to respond to the question from our colleague from Copa Cogeca. And if you don't have a mic, you get one. Exactly, you get one. Chuck.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, I want to give the key messages from the session 2.7, which was related to an European interlinkage of soil protection with other instruments, and the key message was also not only to focus on soil. The message was to link to other topics. Pia Bucella yesterday raised the question, do we still have enough regulation? Or the discussion in our session was more focused on, yes, we have a lot of regulation. We should think first what we should use in which way, and do we release it in a proper way, actually, and therefore the the main part of the group was in a position to enlarge or broadening whenever possible soil protection with other issues. And these other issues could be land development, special planning, of course, agriculture, and last but not least, the resource management. This broadening issue could help us to find also more stakeholders around the table which accept the European initiative for soil protection. We know we have a long story from 2006 on. We hope to get an European regulation for soil protection, but we failed, and now we have to look for a better cookbook how to be successful in the end. What we also discussed is we should change our position from the topic not only related to threats, but better to opportunities for soil protection and soil protection measures. Maybe this could be a way forward to bridge the gap which we still have in the acceptance of soil protection. So, and we should also make more use of voluntary initiatives. Yes, you asked me to bridge the gap to the agriculture. Of course, we have a discussion between soil protection and agriculture, and we always have the message from the farmers. We know what our soils make or keep healthy. But what we see as soil scientists or on the soil regulation side, we see an increase in background and in the values of concentration coming from fertilizers and from other things of the farmers. And so we have to realize still at least a communication lack between the farming or the agriculture and the soil scientists or the soil protection side. What Europe is still doing to bridge this gap, we had a very interesting presentation from the EEA regarding indicators and monitoring. Of course, this could be a way forward, but here was the message. First, we should start, with developing definitions to understand what we are really doing and carry out more added value from these indicators. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Jörg. I would like to know, do you feel your question is being addressed? To spice up things a little. Sorry, hold on a second, I have a mic so that everybody can understand you.
I think that SDGs have to be implemented also here by European farmers, and there is room for everyone, as we have acknowledged here, to be able to participate and to add value to the implementation, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jörg. And we will continue the debate on European soil policies tomorrow, so you have sufficient time to get the two of you together. On actual SDG implementation, also in Germany, we have a report from a session, actually Yvonne, who would like to take us through it. And Yvonne loves it when I say, please be brief.
I do, and I will. Hello, good afternoon. So I want to make a short report from session 2.1, which was called Grounding Global Soil and Land Initiatives. And as the title of the session says, what we were trying to do was to discuss how to best bring all of these emerging global soil and land initiatives, for example, the voluntary guidelines on land tenure, we have the Global Soil Partnership, we have, as we have been discussing, the Sustainable Development Goals that will have implications for soils and land. So how to link those initiatives to the regional and national level was what we were dealing with during our session. Now we have actually examples from the implementation of sustainable soil and land management and governance from many places. We had examples from China, Brazil, Uzbekistan, Cuba, Benin, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Senegal. amongst others, to discuss this. And we also discussed a proposal by the ISS and partners to implement and monitor and accountability of the Sustainable Development Goals for soils and land. And this is the paper that you all received on your chairs. This is this one. Now, I am sure that my fellow participants of the session will bear with me, since we want to have a reaction from the panel. And considering the time, I would like to introduce three main messages from the sessions, and they are focused on the how we do the monitoring and review and accountability for the SDGs. So number one, as we have heard, there seems to be a lot of support in this room for multi-stakeholder dialogues and platforms. But one of the things that we discussed is that these multi-stakeholder dialogues are usually not foreseen or not embedded in national legislation, meaning national and local governments do not have the mandate or are not obliged to engage in this type of multi-stakeholder approaches. So one of the things that we discussed on the how would be that if this type of inclusive approach makes it onto the official and final post-2015 agreement, these will give us a little bit of leeway and a window of opportunity to start engaging at the national but also subnational level in these type of approaches. And these would allow us to have more dialogue but also more collaboration with different stakeholders. So what does this mean? That we have a mandate in this room to engage in further advocacy and in further lobbying of the official process to make sure that this makes it onto the agenda. Number two, we have discussed very successful tools for monitoring and accountability that include the targeted assessments of indicators, but also of national soil policies. And number three, with 3 seconds, would be that soils and land have an underpinning role to support several of the SDGs. And this role is allowing us to think more in systems, and this is a very positive outcome. So we request, as participants of session 2.1, that the outcome document of the Global Soil Week includes a statement on this important role of soil and land resources, and also for an integrated approach to implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Coming back from this proposal on how to do this on the national level, maybe reflecting a little bit more on how this could look like on a national level. And I have somewhere in the room Sani Mamadou together with Walter. And Sani is a little bit going to test our French. And for those of us who are not perfectly fluent, Walter is going to assist us a little in case he makes it onto the stage. So a warm welcome to the two of you.
Merci bien. Alors, notre session, c'est la session réhabilitation des sols pour la sécurité alimentaire. Et nous allons aller très vite. On a eu 7 expériences qui ont été partagées. Et les grands messages ou les messages clés qu'on peut vous donner, c'est d'abord le fait que la question de la réhabilitation des sols, il faut un engagement long terme. Ce n'est pas une question de quelques années, c'est un engagement long terme. Engagement au niveau politique, donc au niveau des États, et aussi un engagement au niveau des bailleurs de fonds pour soutenir une telle démarche, une telle approche, parce que la réhabilitation des terres a besoin du temps.
So we had in this session not only 3 examples from the national level, Iceland, Ethiopia, and we had 3 national examples first. In the first part of our session, that was Ethiopia, Iceland, and Costa Rica. So 3 very different examples. And then we came to what Sami said, 7 examples from the local level, from Uganda, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, the Sahel, Madagascar, Niger, and Tunisia, right. So one of the first lesson he drew from these presentations was the long-term support, which is on the government side and which is on the donor side as well, is absolutely necessary to have success with land rehabilitation programs.
Alors, pour le deuxième aspect ou le deuxième message clé, c'est la nécessité d'une intervention à plusieurs niveaux. Niveau micro, niveau méso et niveau macro. Donc, tous les niveaux doivent être touchés, non pas seulement intervenir seulement au niveau micro, mais il faut intervenir au niveau aussi méso et macro. Mais aussi, le niveau international doit être impliqué. Donc, finalement, ça va être les 4 niveaux. Ça, nous estimons que c'est quelque chose qui est important à prendre en considération. Et dans cette intervention au niveau plutôt local, c'est de ne pas oublier les collectivités locales. Puisque aujourd'hui, pour la plupart des pays africains, nous sommes dans des dimensions de la décentralisation. Donc, les autorités locales doivent être aussi considérées dans cette démarche.
So we learned, the second lesson was that we have, when we are doing programs in land rehabilitation, it should be at all levels, national, meso level and micro level, and this implies as well the implication of local governance.
Alors, un aspect aussi que nous avons trouvé très important, c'est la question multisectorielle. Intervenir dans essentiellement un seul domaine n'a pas trop de sens. Intervenir par exemple dans le domaine agricole et oublier le domaine environnement, élevage et autres n'a pas de sens. Donc la question doit être vue toujours sur son aspect, la dimension multisectorielle de l'intervention. Et dans cette dimension multisectorielle également, il est important de mettre l'accent sur l'appropriation par les bénéficiaires à travers une approche qui met à l'avant la sécurisation foncière. Donc qui est un élément de base qui est aussi multisectoriel et transversal.
Okay, I guess you got that one.
I know that your backs are very lovely, but there's another part of the room also. So now that they have really could appreciate this side of your body, maybe they want to see your other part as well.
Okay, you get the second part. So I guess you got the point. It's a multi-sectoral approach, how to get beyond the silos, and there was one lesson from the examples that landscape approaches is one way of doing it, and very important in all our examples was that land tenure issues need to be involved.
Allô. Alors, pour la suite, un autre élément, c'est l'existence, et ça c'est impératif. Si on veut réussir, c'est important d'avoir un intérêt économique à très court terme. Rapidement, dès qu'on démarre, un intérêt économique à très court terme et qui doit se maintenir dans le long terme. Et cela est la base de l'appropriation par les bénéficiaires. S'il n'y a pas un intérêt économique rapide, on se relâche, on a des priorités, les gens sont dans la pauvreté absolue. Il ne faut pas oublier cet élément. Donc, nous estimons que c'est un des éléments, un message clé qu'il faut donner dans le cadre de l'intervention dans ce sens-là.
Yeah, one key message, the beneficiaries, the implied population, the farmers, they need to feel relatively quick benefit, economic or security benefit, otherwise it's difficult to have them on board.
Et enfin, pour finir, c'est la question de la vision holistique. Dans une telle dimension de travail pour la réhabilitation des sols, pour la sécurité alimentaire, la question doit être vue de manière holistique. Ça veut dire intervenir dans une approche paysagiste ou une approche dite approche terroir qui permet de voir non pas une unité spécifique, mais voir la question de façon beaucoup plus globale, pour une intervention beaucoup plus globale, de manière à anticiper sur certains éléments que de toucher seulement un élément spécifique. Ça ne marche pas. Ce qui peut marcher, c'est d'avoir cette vue holistique, cette vue globale, cette vision holistique de la question de récupération et d'aménagement des espaces pour la sécurité alimentaire. Merci.
Okay. Last point was the holistic manner we have to use in doing these programs going not only in an isolated manner, like addressing soil issues only, but addressing it through landscape approaches. We had even, if I can add on that, an example where a really integrated rural development approach was done. So this is not complete. That's not always necessary to go as far as integrating health and things like that, like we had it in Tunisia. But his point is landscape approach as the framework for intersectoral cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Something that I learned during this Global Soil Week is that integration across scales and integration across sectors is super duper easy in comparison to making two scientific bodies actually work with each other. And therefore I would like to give the floor to Martial, who is going to report on the first ever meeting of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Science and the Science Policy Interface of UNCD. Thank you, Martial.
Thank you. So now I know that I will not be able to respect the time, 3 minutes. And I can speak French also, no? No, let's start in English. So this session was co-organized by the UNCCD Secretariat and also the Global Soil Partnership Secretariat, and with great assistance and facilitation by IISS. So this session was not only a joint meeting, it was the first, and this is really important, the first joint meeting of two really recent scientific panels created 2 years ago only. So on one side, you had the Intergovernmental Technical Soil Panel on Soil, ITPS, that is composed by 27 soil scientists to advise the Global Soil Partnership. And on the other side, it looks like a box, but no. You have the Science Policy Interface that comprises 20 multidisciplinary scientists, including 5 soil scientists, plus 3 observers from international and UN organizations, but also civil society organizations. So this session was organized around 7 presentations to set the scene and have some proposition. So it was presentation by ITPS chair, SPI co-chair, and the SPI and ITPS members. So you can find the details of the program, page 51 of the program. So there were about 50 participants, for sure, including about half of the SPI member, 2/3 of the ITPS member, plus some members of the UNCCD Secretariat and Global Soil Partnership Secretariat. And also it was really interesting to have also 20 people from different reasons that were present to that session. So the major outcome that both ITPS and SPI agree to establish not only the need, but also they agree to establish a collaboration mechanism in order to avoid duplication of effort and to maximize synergies. Without entering into details, 3 major points or entry points were identified that can serve as a basis to now implement effectively this collaboration. So the first point is about SDG. The next SDG that are supposed on that they certainly will be adopted in September by UN Assembly, and particularly SDG linked with land degradation. It's really a good entry point to collaborate. Another entry point is the need for indicators. It's overlap also with the first point, but we have really a need for indicators serving in the same time the 3 Rio Convention, plus more widely all soil and land issue agendas at all scale. That is really important. And the third point that is really perhaps more precise, it's about soil organic carbon, which is relevant both at global, like UNFCCC agenda, for example, but also at local scale. Soil organic carbon links with different ecosystem services, not only climatic regulation, but other ecosystem services, and it has a link with soil health, soil quality. Soil carbon is soil indicator of soil organic matter. So it is really an indicator for a lot of things. And more important, it's linked with a huge diversity of land users and the practices they're implementing on the ground to justly deal with the soil carbon. Hi, how are you? Finishing. Another important point highlighted, that is both ITPS and SPI are working on giving a really strong importance to regional dimension. So this should be really taken into account in our future program of work. So now, we have all in our hands to prove that soils is the substance of transformation, but also the substance for collaboration. So, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. And last but not least, it's Mark Schauer from the ELD Secretariat to swiftly take us through the outcomes of the ELD session. I'll spare all comments on stage and back and front.
Okay, field oriented. Hi, thanks to the organizers for having the opportunity for an 8-hour session. So it's a very good, that was a very good opportunity for us to put some light in general on economics of land and land degradation. All of you who could not participate, you missed a very intense and very informative and very fun, for me, session as well. Much of the material presented was focusing on the outcomes of the work of the ELD initiative. ELD is Economics of Land Degradation, but we had also key information and lots of substance from affiliated or related initiatives and work like Joachim von Braun's CEF or from Alex Müller's Team for Agriculture presented there. The content of the session was more divided up a bit between yesterday and today. Yesterday was a focus on research. We focused, or we heard a lot about case studies which had been conducted in the last 1.5 years, a time, or since the last Global Soil Week, if you want. That was a time frame which kind of meant a quantum leap for the ELD initiative. At that time, we have been pretty busy, and so we had lots to report on, and reporting on upcoming reports, and discussing on potential ways forward, and ways how to get involved into the creation of economic arguments. Yesterday's closing session, or yesterday's closing part, was a panel discussion, which led to today's focus, which was how can we utilize these outcomes? How can we utilize the data which we are creating in our economic research for engaging stakeholders, again, on different levels and from different sectors? This was the focus of today as well. We had, again, discussions and presentations from different initiatives. You will probably hear in the near future more about an initiative. It's called Common Land. It's headed from an organization based in the Netherlands. And we heard about the Soil Leadership Academy from Alex down there, who will be active in the context of UNCCD in leadership building and capacity building in that course. So the question, how can we utilize this, was discussed with the participants throughout the session today. And awareness raising with economic arguments and engaging decision makers with economic arguments was our focus, and we were looking for gateways how to engage decision makers on different political levels, but also with the private sector. That was a different, a specific point for us as well. How can we engage the private sector as one of the main drivers for land degradation, or also as presenting a large opportunity to engage in large-scale sustainable land management as well. So, generally, that might be my personal perception, but I think it was shared by a number of participants as well. We are looking into very interesting times in the context of land degradation. There seems to be, political decision makers seem to take it up, this issue, and we hope that with economic arguments on our side, we can engage them in this process. And as Alex Müller had put it, we need to cooperate within the different initiatives there and provide concise arguments and methodology in this context. Thanks, and just as yes appears
yeah, this time
here.
is for real.
Oh, it's for real, goddamn. Yeah, okay, thank you. Done. Thanks.
Okay, I'll start on my other hand, Rainer, and it's one of the famous Shakespeare saying, brevity is the soul of the wit, which I tend to use in these moments.
Yes, okay. Well, making it short in order to save time. First of all, the discussion concerning the land use, land degradation, and the methodology which is needed in order to link the economics and the policymakers must be, well, can be easily done. Let's say like this, using the knowledge of the scientists, but bringing it to the politicians, it's possible. Let's say like this, so we can define soil maps not because they are quite nicely colored, but they have properties and they have limits. And these are the key parameters which then can be also used to derive from their further land management systems, which means not only for the small farmers or the big farmers, for the countries or continents, but in principle, these soil maps are the basis for a sustainable or for an intensified sustainable, doesn't matter, land use in the future in order to stop degradation, to reduce the threat of further losing soils, areas. Well, how far we can go from 30 or 25 hectare in Austria to 2.5 hectare, or in Germany from 70 to 30 or whatever. This is also all related to the properties and the functions which soils have. And so don't overstress soils. And that's the key parameter for politicians. We have to convince them that they are our partners and we are not the enemies of politicians.
Well, that's a good concluding statement. Austin?
Thank you very much. I think I'll build from what our chair said. We have always sidelined politicians, but I think politicians are part of the platform. We need to link the various levels from the subnational to the national and to the global level where we are today in trying to tackle the issues of soil degradation. And also we need to link all other issues in the landscape approach, as I've indicated, the flood management, energy, the urban development, food production, and economics to the soil. So really, I like the saying that soils are really the substance of collaboration in these SDGs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will be quick, but I'll take it from the ITPS SPI meeting. And in fact, there was a global, let's say, mechanism which has been put in place for looking after soils, I guess. And the 5 pillars that have been developed under the Global Soil Partnership, to some extent, they are agreed by all. I mean, there is governance. I mean, these are the gaps where we talk about governance, information, research, investment, and capacity building. So these are 5, let's say, pillars that we believe, and this is not FAO, these are the 194 member countries, that they agreed that these are maybe pillars to take into account, to look into what's for the future of soils. Just a small comment, again, about this document, which I found very important, on the role of soils when it comes to SDGs. Of course, we know they play an important role to achieve SDGs, but the question remains how, especially when I've seen that, okay, the 3, let's say, highlighted components are multi-stakeholders, again, dialogue. The second is monitoring and indicators, and the third are reporting. And all these 3 are very important, but how to implement, and for this, I guess, partnership, and all of us here, we may contribute to this. Thank you.
I would like to at the end, take up again the question of implementation that was very strongly raised. But I think the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and now that they are going to be adopted, and we are all at least more or less excited to have them. I think the question is very much linked to the question actually is how are we going to verify that we actually achieve these goals? I think that's the very core of the question. And I think speaking in human rights terms, again, we talk about something very central to this to human rights, which is accountability, which is very much linked to what I said before, this distinction between who actually have obligations, are the duty bearers, and who actually are rights holders, and those that these sustainable development goals are also intended to whose rights they want to bring forward. So basically, it's the issue of monitoring. And monitoring, I think, might sound technical, but is not a technical issue, because, and that's a very concrete also experience, as we as FIAN, as a human rights organization, have been doing monitoring on the right to food, on the realization of the human right to food. And so it matters a lot who does monitoring, what exactly do you look at, how do you do it? What information do you take into account? Only quantitative, or do you also take into account qualitative? All these questions, how do you collect your data? All these questions matter, and I am afraid that technology probably will not give all the answers. I think land tenure and land use, including the dimension of soils, are also complex social structures. So to say that there again, also in this idea, let's not pretend that we're starting from zero. There is already something there, and again, there is human rights as a framework also for monitoring is very clear on human rights principles that are inclusive and participatory, and especially for those who are most affected by human rights violations, by hunger and malnutrition, and also to have really to look when we measure them, these goals, and if they are efficient or not, to really look not only at the frameworks and how they work, but really look at the ground. That's the test. Do we really advance with the realization of the human rights of the most marginalized? That's the true test. And there we have something to build upon. We have the human rights system, and especially regarding food security and nutrition. Again, we have the UN Committee on World Food Security that is establishing and discussing at this very moment a monitoring mechanism. Yes.
Thank you. Yvonne has promised you some drinks and dancing tonight. Of course, this has to be earned. And that's why Johan was so kind to restrict his presentation to 45 slides, which he will quickly go through now. And I would like to welcome with me Johan Hjulnestad, the Executive Director of Stockholm Environment Institute, who agreed to wrap up the session. Thank you very much, Johan, and thank you very much for being here. Would like to ask you to please take your.
Thanks a lot, Jess. And I mean, you should have told me. I have to cut 30 slides now here.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
You know, the challenge. A lot of people are saying, "I'm standing between you and the coffee break." I'm standing between you and the dinner and dance.
Talking about increasing
the
pressure.
Exactly. Let me test one thing, because you've been sitting here for a long time now, and you know you feel probably a little bit of energy going down in the room. Can I just check one thing? How many people in here, raise your hand, believe that soils are important for development? Can I check? Okay, that's great. Okay. And how many people believe that land is also an important aspect related to the SDGs? Land issues. Okay. That's good. Actually, this is one of my first conclusions, because I'm supposed to be here a little bit as the connection to what we should talk about tomorrow, the visions for the future and integrated perspective beyond 2015. I think one of the key challenges we have, really, and this was an example of that, is that we are still talking to those already convicted. convinced, not convicted, they should be convicted, but convinced. And this is one key challenge I think we have when we move forward. And that I also still take with me from this conference, even if we have so many different dimensions being discussed in the different sessions that we have attended. It's an extraordinary discussion in all the sessions, very wide, very deep. And fundamentally, and that is good news, we all have a common vision. We believe in what we are doing. We believe in this integration. But we are still not reaching out to those that are not convinced. So next year, we should clearly, or 2 years, or whenever we organize the next forum, we have to make sure when we ask the first day, how many people are here are not convinced about the role of soils? At least half of them should not be the first day. The final day, yes, but not the first day. This is a year of opportunities, that's for sure. We have the 3 global processes coming together. We are talking about the SDGs, climate. We should not forget about the finance for development. It's first, it's in July. And maybe the world will not, commit hundreds of billions before the other conferences, but still, it's a sort of testing point for us to try to get some of our issues into the global debate, really at that conference, Finance for Development. However, but I think it's good. We focus on these 3 in this conference this time. However, and this is painful to say for me, and I'm sure not all of you will agree, but that's the whole thing. These are potentially not the most important conferences for what we are doing here. The new geopolitical landscape, all the other international development processes taking place, this is also what we need to address much more fundamentally when we talk about integration, when we move into that tomorrow. Regardless if we talk about the free trade agreement between Europe and US, TTIP, how much will the SDGs influence the TTIP? I'm not sure at all, but we have to. We have similar agreements in Asia. We have regional developments in terms of the EU, of course, but also in other parts of the world. Political developments which are extremely important for us, far beyond the SDGs and climate negotiations, but so important for what we do. At the same time as we are optimistic, however, because we can really influence them, we see increased fragmentation, increased conflicts in the world. There's no question about it. Those that have read media, follow media, more than 1,000 people have died this week alone in the Mediterranean. The question is, of course, the issues that we are talking about here, how much are they concerned with what is happening in the Mediterranean right now? What is happening really in terms of the conflicts we are seeing in the world, in terms of natural resources management? That's the broader agenda we have in front of us. And when we talk about integration, these are the hard security, hard political issues that we need to talk about as well, at the same time, as we are discussing the more sort of scientific, managerial aspects. And overall, we have not managed to decrease pressure on natural resources. It's a fact. I mean, we have done so much, but we haven't decreased the pressures. When we talk about integration, what is it that we are talking about? It's one of these buzzwords. We were talking about actually, when we had the steering committee Sunday, if we would run this game, sorry the language here, bullshit bingo. The fact that we love to use various concepts and so on to describe things. Integrated approaches is one of them. And when we get tired of integrated approaches, we talk about nexus instead. It sounds much more, fashionable. We have to be critical about how we adopt new approaches and how we discuss with them. We have to have a critical debate. Albert Hubbard said once, and I like that, to avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. And that's actually a good strategy. A lot of, some politicians do that sometimes. It is a complex issue. Why, what, and how when we talk about integration? Why? Why? Well, we want to facilitate implementation. I'm not sure. As many have said, it takes time. You said that. It takes time when we want to work on integration. But we know in the long run it facilitates implementation. We want integration because we believe we can achieve multiple benefits for different actors. We get buy-ins. Those that are not in this room are critical to what we are doing and believe that we are trying to hamper development by adding a lot of different new perspectives. If we can demonstrate by multiple benefits that they also benefit, then we are gaining and we are winning this game. We can deal with competing demands. The landscape approach is very interesting in that perspective. There are so many competing demands. And when we talked about urban areas, and that was reflected, I was actually a bit surprised when I saw on your exhibition that only 2% of the global land is urban areas. But we know that they are also quite often built in on the best lands that we have. So it might be a small percentage, but a big impact. And urban areas are growing 1.5 million people per week. So it's quite a lot. You didn't start the clock. Did you realize that? Yes? Are you okay? We can do that. So, and another question is, of course, what? What does it mean? What is it that we need to integrate? And that's a very interesting question. It's all the way from sort of our societal systems, broader societal systems when we talk about integration. That sounds enormously fussy, and it is. But that's where we start somehow. How do we integrate between these? We also need to understand that we are talking about integration both in horizontal ways and lateral ways. Different scales. The horizontal being maybe different sectors, the laterals being from global to local. Management systems, the science and capacity systems, different scientific disciplines. But also in terms of innovation, how many innovations do we not have solving one problem and adding additional problems? And in terms of climate, water, soil, this is very common. Many technologies being energy or climate smart or water intensive, and vice versa. And then the how. How do we do this? Well, if we want true integration, we really need to focus on societal problems and responding to them. There are so many issues that we need to respond to. If our integrated approach that can respond to broader societal questions, issues, challenges, including the tragedy we see in the Mediterranean, including the fact that we have completely stalling economies in the EU, including many of the resource constraints that we see in the world, then the how question becomes so much easier. We must embrace complexity, and we have to embrace also that there are very different perspectives on all this. You know, because this is between the drinks, and you can say, it's funny how Jess moves out on his chair, you know. I know. Oh, it's gone red, but that's a new time. I look at this one. It says Sol Week. It says Sol Week here. Anyway, I will not go into the various aspects. Listening to a lot of the presentations here today, I mean, you know what the topics are when we come to integration. I don't need to repeat them, although my favorite quote from the last Soil Week, someone twittered that earlier. I saw that it must be someone in the secretariat that I told yesterday about my favorite quote from the last Soil Week. There was a gentleman standing up. You might be in this room even, we'll see. There was a gentleman standing up towards the end of a session, you know, saying, I want to have the floor, and he said, I think everything has been said, but not by me. So, you know, I think that was actually a great quote. But anyway, so I won't go into all these different details that I had prepared. You know, what is it that we need to address when we talk about integration, when we move in that direction? Just saying that some of the sort of headlines, I believe, are important. Policy integration. Of course, we have to bridge agendas. That goes back a little bit to showing the benefits. The climate agenda gets much more traction today because we can highlight how it's connected to health issues, for instance. How it's connected to better cities. How it's connected to resource efficiency in broader terms. It's not just the climate issue. It's bridging a number of agendas, and we have to do that as well between the different agendas that we have. The level of implementation is key, and managing impacts. So we talk about level of implementation from national to local, but we also have the whole issue of externalities, the impacts in other parts of the world, from consumer-producer relationship, trade issues, foreign direct investments, and trade, and these kind of aspects have not enough been addressed, I think. We have the integration within broader value systems related to land and water, and we talk a lot about it, the economic dimensions, the social dimensions, the environmental dimensions. And I argue that here we also have, come up Jess and join me, here we also have questions related to ideological dimensions and value systems, and you know, we tend to keep away from them. And I hear them all the time, people having different opinions, not because of science, but because of values, because of ideology. We have the whole macro level changes in terms of shifting economies, green economy, bio-based economy. Are the social dimensions in there? And we have different communities, different language, different priorities meeting in terms of these different aspects. Let me finalize with my last 10 slides. Sorry. No, but also in terms of moving forward, I'm representing a sister organization, the Stockholm Environment Institute. And I have to also say something about this issue of science and knowledge generation. I think that is important for us. Because the integration there is also key. It is really fundamentally very interesting. I must say, I'm an outsider to this community. I'm not a soil person at all. If I'm anything, I'm a bit of a climate, water, policy geek, some kind, mixture. But so I measure sometimes when I attend conferences, the sort of, can I understand what they're talking about? And even I can fairly well understand what people are talking about here. So I think in terms of communication, how we actually frame the debate, that works well. But we have a lot of in-depth scientific knowledge, and we quite often hear, we don't need more knowledge, we need action. And we have a lot of knowledge. But if we take an integrated approach, it's a completely different way of mixing knowledge, mixing capacities, mixing competences. That is actually new. That is challenging. And that is something we have to work much more actively in. We should not get rid of the true experts. We love soil scientists. They are the best friends we have. Maybe not for politicians, but for us, others. And we need them. We also need systems of integrating knowledge. And I really like the fact that someone mentioned education. I wonder, when I was in school, was I really trained for the world I live in today? I'm not sure. Do we train these kids today for the world in 2030? I'm not sure about that. So we have to secure also that lack of knowledge does not translate into lack of action. I end with a quote. I may have used this quote before. I get nervous, but because it's one of my favorites. But tomorrow we move into a little bit more the action side of the conference to a certain degree, a vision moving forward. What can we do? How can we translate this into action? And I found an anonymous quote once that I really like about conferences. A conference is a gathering of people that individually can do nothing and collectively can agree that nothing can be done. So let us hope that this is absolutely wrong for the conference, but it's in your hands actually to secure that whatever we do tomorrow, we start to address really the fundamental problems of sustainability, which goes well beyond the SDGs. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Johan. This was really cool. Thank you. Okay, 3 brief points, then I shut up. Those of you who want to walk to the dinner location, which is actually quite a nice walk, and all the guys and girls in green t-shirts and other responsible people have been equipped with a little touristic guide. So whenever there's 20 people assembled, they will just walk you through Berlin. It's a nice and scenic walk until you get to the thing. Those of you who don't want to walk and feel rather like relaxing a little, here there's a bus leaving at 6:45. So walking is 6:30, bus is 7:15, and it will leave in front of the hotel. Second, I don't know if you know who of you is actually following German media. There is a strike on the German rail system. I was told that I should inform you that it doesn't really affect the main transport routes. So if you consider staying on, you're welcome, but there's no need to flee now because the trains still operate. And last but not least, Tandu had expressed this in the beginning. We invite you to submit additional open space forums. The deadline for this is tomorrow, 2 p.m., and the boards are displayed close to the Twitter wall outside close to the conference concierge desk. And with this, I would like to close. I thank you very much for enduring. I thank Johan very much for his very engaging speech at this point of the day. And I wish us all a lovely evening. And I look forward to seeing you tonight.